Hello guys, this is your friend ITACHI Fanfic 3.0 and we are back a new fanfic story which is, what if Naruto became the vessel to stop the chakra parasite instead of destroying it? Part 1. Let's start fanfic without wasting more time. The world had learned to say his name with hope. Naruto Uzumaki. A hero shaped by war, loneliness, and stubborn belief. He stood now not as a boy chasing recognition, but as a man who had survived being broken and reforged by fate. His clothes were torn not by carelessness, but by years of battles that refused to let him rest. Each rip in the fabric carried memory. Each scar on his skin held a lesson the world never saw. Behind him stood another presence. Silent, heavy, undeniable. Killer B. The man who had once been dismissed as chaos, now standing as balance. His body was carved by discipline and violence alike, marked with symbols that carried histories older than Naruto's pain. The white cloth around his shoulders flowed like a reminder that freedom was never free. In his hand rested a blade, not raised, not lowered, waiting. Naruto extended his arm forward, chakra gathering in his palm. The Rasengan was not just a technique anymore. It was a reflection of his will, compressed, controlled, restrained by experience. The blue light swirled calmly, not wildly like before. Power no longer needed to scream to be terrifying. Once, Naruto would have rushed forward without thinking. Now, he waited. The battlefield was not a place of noise at this moment. It was a place of decision. Naruto had learned that the most important battles were not fought with fists, but with restraint. Every step forward could rewrite the future, or erase it. Killer B felt it too. The tension between them was not distrust, but understanding. Two Jinchuriki who had survived being weapons. Two men who had stared into the darkness inside themselves and refused to disappear. Naruto remembered the boy he used to be. Alone. Loud. Desperate to be seen. That boy still existed somewhere inside him, but he no longer led. Pain had taught Naruto that strength without direction only created more graves. He had buried too many dreams already. This mission was different. They were not here to fight an enemy village. Not here to claim territory or revenge. They were here because something ancient had begun to stir, something that did not belong to any nation. A force that fed on chakra itself. Naruto had felt it days ago. A disturbance deep in the flow of the world. Not loud. Not violent. Subtle. Like a wound reopening slowly. The kind of danger that didn't announce itself until it was too late. The elders had argued. Some wanted to seal it away. Some wanted to destroy it. Some wanted to use it. Naruto had said nothing at first. Then he spoke. And when he did, the room fell silent. He had told them that power without understanding always returned as tragedy. That the world didn't need another god, another monster, another excuse for war. He had reminded them that peace wasn't maintained by fear, but by responsibility. That was why he was here now. Not as a Hokage. Not as a legend. But as someone willing to take the burden personally. Killer B shifted slightly behind him, his presence steady. He trusted Naruto. Not because Naruto was perfect, but because Naruto had failed, learned, and stood back up every time. That kind of strength couldn't be taught. Naruto's grip tightened. The Rasengan hummed gently, responding to his thoughts. He could feel Kurama watching. Not hostile, not mocking, but alert. Even the Nine Tails understood that this threat was different. It did not seek domination. It sought consumption. A parasite of chakra. Naruto exhaled slowly. He thought of Jiraiya. Of Neji. Of everyone who had believed in him before he believed in himself. He would not let their sacrifices become meaningless. Killer B spoke quietly, not with words, but with presence. A subtle signal. A reminder that Naruto wasn't alone anymore. That being strong didn't mean carrying everything by yourself. Naruto smiled faintly. That smile wasn't carefree. It wasn't innocent. It was resolved. He took one step forward. Not into battle, but into responsibility. Whatever awaited them ahead would not be defeated by brute force alone. It would require understanding, restraint, and a willingness to risk everything without becoming a monster in return. Naruto knew this path would test him more than any enemy before. Not because it would try to kill him, but because it would try to change him. And for the first time since becoming the hero everyone admired, Naruto wondered something he had never allowed himself to ask before. What if saving the world required him to lose the part of himself that believed everyone could be saved? The Rasengan continued to spin, calm and deadly. Behind him, Killer Bee stood ready, not as backup, but as proof that survival was possible. The world held its breath. This was not the beginning of a war. This was the beginning of a choice. Naruto did not rush forward. That alone showed how much he had changed. There was a time when hesitation meant fear to him. Now, hesitation meant awareness. He could feel the chakra around him behaving differently, as if the world itself was uneasy. The air did not resist him, yet it did not welcome him either. It felt watched. Not by eyes, but by intention. He lowered his arm slightly, the Rasengan still spinning, its light reflecting off the worn edges of his sleeve. The technique responded to him instantly, adjusting its density without effort. Once, controlling this much power would have exhausted him. Now it felt like breathing. Killer Bee shifted his weight behind him, not impatient, not aggressive. His presence was grounded, like an anchor driven deep into reality. He had faced gods, legends, and madness wearing the mask of humor, but this silence stripped all jokes away. Even he understood that this was not an enemy that could be mocked into submission. Naruto's thoughts drifted, not to strategy, but to memory. He remembered the village before it trusted him. Before smiles replaced suspicion. Back then, he had believed that becoming strong would solve everything. That if he could just stand at the top, pain would stop existing. He had been wrong. Strength didn't erase suffering. It only made you responsible for noticing it. That realization had been heavier than any battle. This presence ahead of them, this thing feeding on chakra, felt like a reflection of that truth. It wasn't evil in the way enemies usually were. It didn't rage or boast. It didn't seek domination. It consumed because consumption was its nature. Naruto understood that too well. He had once been like that. Starving for acknowledgement. Devouring attention wherever he could find it. If Iruka hadn't reached him, if Jiraiya hadn't guided him, if his friends hadn't stayed, would he have become something similar? That thought settled uncomfortably in his chest. The ground beneath his feet felt solid, yet distant, as if reality itself was layered. Chakra lines twisted subtly, bending away from an unseen center. Naruto followed that distortion instinctively. His senses were sharper now, honed by battles that had forced him to listen rather than react. This wasn't just a threat. It was a wound in the natural order. Killer Bee finally spoke, his voice low, stripped of rhythm and playfulness. It's close. Naruto nodded. He didn't need confirmation. Kurama's awareness pressed against his own. Not alarmed, but wary. The Nine Tails had lived long enough to recognize when something did not belong to the cycle of hatred, revenge, and war. This was older, colder, a mistake left behind by history. Naruto tightened his fingers, then relaxed them. He let the Rasengan stabilize further, compressing it until it was almost silent, its energy folded inward. This was not an attack meant to destroy. It was a key. If brute force had been the answer, the world would already be peaceful. Naruto had learned that lesson through loss. He would not repeat the same mistake simply because he now had the power to survive it. As they moved forward together, Naruto felt the weight of unseen eyes. Not judgment. Curiosity. The kind that comes from something encountering resistance for the first time. The entity was aware of them now. Naruto did not flinch. He remembered standing before pain, realizing that understanding an enemy could be more powerful than killing them. He remembered how mercy had reshaped the world more deeply than fear ever could. But this was different. This thing could not be reasoned with in words. It needed to be understood in essence. Naruto slowed his steps, allowing Killer Bee to align beside him instead of behind. There was no hierarchy between them here. Two Jinchuriki walking forward not as weapons, but as witnesses. Naruto spoke quietly, more to himself than to Bee. If this thing keeps feeding, it won't stop at villages. Killer Bee nodded. It'll drain the roots. Leave nothing growing. That was the true danger. Not destruction, but emptiness. A world without chakra would not simply lose ninjas. It would lose balance. Life itself would fracture. Naruto could feel it already. A faint thinning, like color fading from a painting. And for the first time since the war ended, Naruto felt something close to fear. Not fear of dying. Fear of failing to protect a future that didn't know it was in danger. He thought of children training in the academy. Of laughter echoing through streets rebuilt from ruin. Of ordinary people living ordinary lives, unaware of how fragile peace truly was. They deserved more than another legend's sacrifice. They deserved a solution. Naruto stopped. The presence ahead of them intensified, not violently, but attentively. Like a tide pausing before deciding whether to rise or retreat. Naruto raised his hand again, the Rasengan glowing softly, not threatening, not inviting. Just honest. He opened himself slightly, not recklessly, but deliberately. Letting a controlled fragment of his chakra resonate outward. It was a risk. Offering energy to a parasite could invite disaster. But Naruto had never changed the world by playing safe. The reaction was immediate. The space ahead of them warped subtly, as if something unseen had inhaled. Naruto felt the pull. Not strong enough to drag him forward, but strong enough to confirm his suspicion. It was aware. It recognized him. Not as Naruto Uzumaki, but as a source. A vessel. A possibility. Killer Bee's muscles tensed, ready to intervene. Naruto lifted his other hand slightly, stopping him without looking back. Not yet, Naruto said calmly. This wasn't a fight. It was a conversation without language. Naruto focused inward, steadying his emotions. Fear, anger, pride, all of it had to be set aside. This thing did not respond to dominance. It responded to availability. And Naruto realized something unsettling. If he pushed too hard, if he lost control, this entity could latch onto him. Not as an enemy, but as a host. The idea sent a chill through even Kurama's presence. Naruto smiled faintly again. Not out of confidence, but acceptance. If this was the burden his power attracted, then he would face it directly. He had never asked to be special. He had only asked not to be alone. Now the world had answered in the most dangerous way possible. Naruto took another step forward. The line between savior and sacrifice blurred. And somewhere deep within the distortion ahead, something ancient began to respond, not with hunger, but recognition. Naruto felt it clearly now. The recognition was not friendly, but it was not hostile either. It was the kind of awareness that comes when something ancient realizes it has finally found something worthy of attention. Not prey. Not threat. Compatibility. The pull strengthened slightly, just enough to test him. Naruto adjusted instinctively, grounding his chakra the way he once learned to steady himself against Kurama's rage. The difference was subtle but terrifying. Kurama had emotion, intention, memory. This presence had none of that. It was empty. And emptiness was patient. Naruto realized then why it had remained hidden for so long. It did not hunt aggressively. It waited. It allowed civilizations to rise, chakra to grow richer, deeper, more refined. Only when the world reached a certain density did it awaken. Like a harvest. Killer Bee felt Naruto's shift immediately. Years of surviving as a Jinchuriki had taught him to read silence better than words. He noticed the minute change in Naruto's posture, the way his breathing slowed even further. This thing's testing you, B said quietly. Naruto didn't deny it. It's deciding, Naruto replied. Not whether to attack, but whether I'm worth taking. The words were calm, but the implication was heavy. Naruto had faced enemies who wanted him dead. He had faced enemies who wanted to control him. This was different. This entity did not want Naruto to disappear. It wanted to continue through him. Naruto remembered the warnings of the past. Power that exists outside balance always seeks a vessel. Always seeks expression. If sealed incorrectly, it doesn't vanish, it migrates. And Naruto was standing at the center of that equation. For the first time since mastering his power, Naruto felt truly replaceable. Not as a hero, but as a container. Kurama stirred uneasily. Not out of fear, but something closer to offense. The Nine Tails had accepted Naruto as a partner, not a cage. The idea of something else claiming that space was unacceptable. Naruto felt that reaction and steadied it. Easy, he thought. Not yet. He looked forward again, his blue eyes steady, unblinking. He allowed another controlled pulse of chakra to flow outward, more refined than before. This time, he shaped it, not as power, but as identity. Not just energy, memory, loneliness, resolve, loss, hope. The reaction was immediate. The pull hesitated. Naruto felt confusion ripple back toward him. Not emotion. Distortion. As if the entity struggled to process something that could not be consumed. Chakra that carried meaning resisted absorption. Naruto understood then. This thing could devour chakra, but not purpose. It could strip power, but not choice. That was its weakness. Killer Bee noticed it too. The tension shifted, subtle but undeniable. The pressure eased just slightly, like a grip loosening when something doesn't fit as expected. You're not just feeding it, B said. You're confusing it. Naruto nodded slowly. It's never encountered chakra shaped by acceptance, Naruto said. Only fear. Only ambition. Only desperation. Naruto had once embodied all of those. But he had outgrown them. The entity recoiled. Not retreating, but recalibrating. Naruto sensed its curiosity deepen. If it could not consume him completely, perhaps it could learn from him. Adapt. That realization struck harder than any attack. Adaptation meant evolution. And evolution meant escalation. Naruto lowered his hand slightly, letting the Rasengan dissolve gently. He would not escalate unless necessary. Every action now would shape what this thing became next. This was no longer about stopping a threat. It was about preventing the birth of something worse. Naruto turned his head slightly toward Killer Bee. If it learns from us, Naruto said, it won't just drain chakra anymore. Bee's expression darkened. It'll choose. Naruto finished the thought. Who gets to keep it? Silence settled between them. Not empty, but heavy with understanding. Naruto thought of the villages again. Of rival nations barely holding peace together. Of people who still believed strength justified ownership. If this entity learned discrimination, learned preference, the world would tear itself apart trying to be chosen. Naruto straightened. That could not be allowed. If this thing needed an example of coexistence, then Naruto would be that example. Not by surrendering, not by dominating, but by setting a boundary so absolute that even an ancient force would have to acknowledge it. He stepped forward again, this time without chakra flaring. Just a man walking into the unknown. Killer Bee stayed close, not interfering, not retreating. Naruto opened his mind fully now. Not to merge, not to offer, but to declare. You can exist, but you will not own. You will not consume without consequence. You will not choose the world's future. The response came. Not as words, not as force, but as resistance. The presence pushed back. Testing. Naruto's body tensed. Not from fear, but from effort. This was harder than fighting. Harder than sealing. He was negotiating with something that did not understand negotiation. His heartbeat remained steady. He had learned patience from loss. The pressure increased again, this time sharper. Naruto felt the edges of his chakra strain. Kurama growled internally, ready to surge forward. Naruto held him back. Not yet, he whispered aloud. Because if he unleashed everything now, this thing would learn exactly how powerful humanity could become. And that knowledge could doom them all. Naruto clenched his fist slowly. This was only the beginning. And he knew, deep down, that by stepping forward today, he had placed himself on a path where retreat might never be possible again.